President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call in progress be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I was not preparing to come down and speak today. I just want to make a few comments because I've been listening to what's going on in one of the other rooms up here. Everyone's zeroing in and targeting a guy named Scott Pruitt that they don't think should be confirmed to be the administrator of the EPA. Well, I know Scott Pruitt pretty well. He happens to be the Attorney General for my state of Oklahoma. And in fact, I recruited him to run for the state legislature many years ago, and he's someone I know very, very well. He resides in my city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he is eminently qualified for this thing. I just want to make a couple of comments responding. I chaired the Environment and Public Works Committee for some number of years, and during that time frame, we started considering his nomination. And I heard all kinds of criticisms. I say to the chair that they talk about the fact he has sued the EPA. And how can a person who sued the EPA be qualified to serve as the director of the EPA? Well, I think that's a pretty good qualification, considering what the EPA has been doing over during the Obama administration. I mean, and look at some of the lawsuits that he has. The WOTUS. WOTUS is Waters of the United States. Of the many regulations that they've come up with, this is one of the most onerous. In fact, I would say probably in all states, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and the rest of them, that they have the same response as the Farm Bureau had when they say, I asked the question, what is the worst thing that could happen or has happened to the farmers and ranchers of America? Not just in Oklahoma, but throughout America. And they said, well, it's not anything that's in the Ag Bill or the Agriculture Bill. It is the overregulation of the EPA. Now, you ask the question, which of all the overregulations of the EPA is the worst one, according to farmers now? And that is the WOTUS regulation, the Waters of the United States. Now, liberals, as long as I can remember, have tried to get the jurisdiction of water away from the states and give it to the federal government. I mean, that's the general philosophy of someone who's liberal. They want to have the power concentrated in the United States, in Washington. And so that was the effort that they made. As a matter of fact, it was 6 years ago that there was a House member and a Senate member that introduced a bill to take the word navigable out of our laws. Now, the federal government, the state governments have control over all water rights except for navigable rights. Well, I understand that. But if they could have taken that word navigable out, then the federal government would have taken over that entire jurisdiction. Well, the two that were doing that were Senator Feingold from Wisconsin and Congressman Oberstar from Minnesota. Not only did we defeat both of those pieces of legislation 6 years ago, but defeated both of them at the polls afterwards. And so this is an issue that has been an issue that's been around for a long time. So yes, in fact, Scott Pruitt, as Attorney General from Tulsa, he joined 15 other states, I might add, including the state of Louisiana, in suing the rule that the Obama administration had put through on WOTUS, the water resources. And to show how he was on sound ground, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals has since that time said that, yes, he was right. He was, and they put a stay on it. The next of the regulations, you know, I just did a TV thing asking about the most onerous of regulations. It's kind of hard to answer that question because they're all so bad. They all inflict such a hardship on the business community throughout America. But the Clean Power Plan, let's go back and look at the history of that. The Clean Power Plan, it all started back in about 2002, when at that time they wanted to have, it had to do with when they first started talking about global warming. And so they were going to somehow do away with the emissions of CO2. And so they tried to do it with legislation in 2002, then again in 2004, again in 2005, and about every other year since then. It's always been rejected by the United States Senate. And it's been rejected by the United States Senate by an increased margin each time. And yet they keep saying, no, we're going to have some type of a cap and trade legislation. We calculated what that would cost. It's between $300 and $400 billion a year. And frankly, it wouldn't accomplish anything. I have to say that the first administrator of the EPA under Obama was Lisa Jackson. I enjoyed her. I thought I asked her the question, you know, if we were to do away with CO2 altogether in the United States of America, would this have the effect of reducing it worldwide? And she said no, because this isn't where the problem is. The problem's in China, the problem's in India, the problem's in Mexico. And so the more we chase our ability to generate electricity to those areas, the more, and they don't have any restrictions on CO2 emissions, then that's going to increase, not decrease. So that's the type of thing. Well, they weren't able to pass it legislatively, so along comes President Obama. He says, well, we can't do it through legislation, we'll do it through regulation. So they had the Clean Power Plan. The Clean Power Plan is essentially the same thing as the legislation that we have defeated. And so, yes, Scott Pruitt, the Attorney General from Oklahoma, came along and he filed a lawsuit against the EPA. And this worked out really pretty well. They had a lot of support behind it. And it wasn't the Sixth Circuit, it was the United States Supreme Court that stayed this one. So what I'm saying is, yeah, sure, he has had the occasion, along with some 26 other states in the case of the Clean Power Plan, of filing a lawsuit against the EPA. But he's been successful in doing that. Let me clarify another thing that's been misrepresented on this floor several times. They refer to a characterization that I gave, about 4 or 5 years ago, called the hoax. The hoax is climate changing. We all know that climate is constantly changing. All the evidence is there, the scriptural evidence, historic evidence, it's always been there. Climate has always changed. The hoax is that the world's coming to an end because of man-made gases. And that's the thing that the clarification that needs to be made if we're going to be completely honest. And by the way, when they criticize Scott Pruitt for suing the EPA, I'm reminding them that he also has sued several oil companies, ConocoPhillips. He have had a lawsuit against them for alleged double dipping, BP, Chevron. And so it's not just as if he's somehow owned by the oil companies. But, and I always have to say, when people say, well, you know, the oil companies contribute to campaigns, not anything like the far left environmentalists do. Remember Tom Steyer. Tom Steyer said before the 2014 elections, he said, I'm going to put $100 million of my money to elect people who will go along with all these far left programs. And of course, it didn't work in 2014. He actually, at that time, spent $75 million. This is one individual we're talking about. So those guys over there, they're the ones that are putting money in campaigns, and I understand that. The last thing I want to correct, and I wish more people would talk about this. Frankly, I wish that President Trump would say more about this, because they're always talking about this. 97% of the scientists say that go along with the global warming thing. That isn't true at all. In fact, go to my website and you'll find a piece that was in the Wall Street Journal that makes it very, very clear that that isn't true and documents that case. The scientists that have been saying this are one group. It's called the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, that's the United Nations, in case there's someone who doesn't understand that. And they're the ones that provided all the credibility in terms of the science that backs up all the statements that were made about global warming. And I have an occasion, some people are not aware that every December now for 21 years, the United Nations has had the biggest party of the year. It's always in some exotic place. And I remember in 2009, it was in Copenhagen. And we had all of the people, my good liberal friends I love dearly here in the United States Senate and in the House, went over there to tell 192 countries that we're going to pass legislation that will have a cap and trade. and I went over as a truth squad of one person to tell them that what has been represented to them was, in fact, not going to happen. Well, right before going, Lisa Jackson was the first nominee or the first confirmed director of the EPA. I asked her the question on the record, live on TV, in the committee room the committee that I chaired. I said, I understand, I'm going to be going over to Copenhagen to tell them the truth over there. In the meantime, you're going to take over jurisdiction so you can try to do this with a regulation. To do that, you have to have an endangerment finding. For to have an endangerment finding, you have to have science behind you. Now, what science will you use and she was smiling. She, was a very honest person. She was smiling. I said, what science are you going to use for your endangerment finding that gives you the opportunity to do this? What you couldn't do with legislation, you can do with regulation. She said, well, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. As luck would have it, it was a matter of days after that ClimateGate came in. How many people remember ClimateGate? They never talk about it. It was the worst. Let me just tell you how it was characterized. What ClimateGate was those individuals who are at the top of the IPCC had gotten together and tried to alter the science to support their point of view, and they got caught doing it. And the world responded to it. Newsweek, they said, once celebrated climate researchers feel like the used car salesman. Some of the IPCC's most quoted data and recommendations were taken straight out of unchecked activist brochures. The UN scientist, Dr. Philip Lloyd, said, the result is not scientific. And they're all talking about ClimateGate now. They're talking about how the IPCC rigged the science. A guy that was a IPCC physicist said that ClimateGate was a fraud on a scale I've never seen before. Clive Cook with the Financial Times, he said that the stink of intellectual corruption is overpowering. Christopher Booker with the UK Telegraph, that's one of the largest in London. He said it's the worst scientific scandal of our generation. Now, what are they talking about? They're talking about the science that is behind their accusations that they've made. So this, if anyone hears them repeat over, even if it's been refuted, it's been rebuked, the 97% of the scientists agree they are not right. So, yeah, my time has expired here, and I just wanted to clarify that so people know, because one thing that I know is going to happen, and that is that Scott Pruitt, the Attorney General from the state of Oklahoma, will be confirmed by a good margin, by party margin, to be the administrator of the EPA. It'll be a great change. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.